Hello everybody, it's Aaron back from Screen Stars, and I'm here once again to do another review for Geek Legion of Doom. And today I'm here to review the 2018 boxing drama Glass Jaw, a film that is due for release on the 26th of October. Now then, boxing dramas, inevitably and unfortunately I suppose you could say, most boxing dramas are going to get compared to Rocky. And this is no exception to a large degree. And what is this film about? Well, this film focuses on a young boxer called Travis Austin, who at the beginning of the film, you see the film focuses heavily on his upbringing, his abusive upbringing, and the fact that he was abandoned by his parents and left to be brought up by foster parents, so quite a fractured upbringing. And then right at the beginning you see him fighting for the light heavyweight championship of the world. And this isn't a spoiler because it happens very early in the movie. He wins, he's on top of the world, he's living the dream, he throws a huge party to celebrate at his lavish house, and unfortunately there's a tragedy that takes place at this party, which results in Travis unfortunately spending time in jail, 4 years in actual fact in jail. And he's sentenced initially to 2 years, but due to all these inmates wanting to fight this boxing champion, he ends up serving another 2 years, so 4 years in total in prison. When he comes out of prison, he finds that everybody he thought he could trust has abandoned him, his boxing career is over, he's lost his house, and he can't seem to reconnect with his girlfriend, so he's in a pretty bad place really. He can't get work. So he has to dabble in underground fights to try and make ends meet. But eventually, he gets on the road to redemption and he finds a way to try and reconnect with his girlfriend and potentially get his boxing career back on track. And that's the basic story for this movie, Glass Jaw. Now, there's some things about this movie that are interesting and kind of work. And there's a few things about this movie that don't, and we'll talk about both. Now, in regards to what works with this movie, I think the story is quite an interesting one, and I think it deserved to be told. It was an interesting boxing story. The performances throughout were good. There was a few character actors who you'll recognise in this movie that really add to the flavour of this movie, and they really bring something to it and give it an air of legitimacy. And the boxing action itself, which is the main thing you want to see in a boxing drama, is done particularly well, and you could describe it as explosive boxing action when you do get a bit of the boxing. Unfortunately though, for some of the things that don't work with this movie is the lead performance by who plays Travis Austin, and my understanding is he's a former model turned actor. His performance is lacking a little bit, but he's given an awful lot to do in this movie, an awful lot of dialogue and an awful lot of acting, and you could see he was a little bit out of his depth, but I do applaud him for trying, because he tried very, very hard. But unfortunately it's no denying he struggled a little bit with his performance. While the boxing action itself in this movie worked reasonably well, and it was fairly brutal and explosive at times, it was edited in such a way that it didn't feel like it flowed particularly well, and it was a little bit hard to follow, and a little bit rushed. And you did get quite a lot of boxing in this movie. You had one at the beginning, a fight, and then there was some prison type stuff and underground type stuff, and then a huge fight at the end. So there is quite a lot of boxing action in this movie. Unfortunately, the things that didn't work with this movie is it was just too short. It was an hour and a half long, and for what they tried to fit into this movie, the story they tried to tell, it was too short. I think it needed a good 15-20 minutes more to flesh out this story and flesh out some of these characters and let it breathe a bit. For example, the prison bit, when he goes to prison, it's over far too quickly, and you don't get a sense of how difficult that was for him, and how much that affected him, the prison term. It was over far too quickly, I thought, and the same for a lot of parts of this movie. They moved on too quickly, and it just felt a little bit rushed. I would have actually preferred this film to have been a little bit longer. a couple of plot holes in this movie that didn't make a lot of sense. Number one, we'll talk about, it's not a plot hole, but the title. Now, to anybody that knows anything about boxing, a glass jaw basically means someone who can't take a punch. Well, that's never an issue in this movie for anybody. It's a bit of a strange title, really, because there's nobody in this film with a glass jaw, so I didn't really understand the title. There's a scene when this tragedy takes place at his party, Travis's party, which inevitably leads him to go into jail. Before he goes to jail, his lawyer sits him down and says, look, it wasn't your fault. And essentially it wasn't, this tragedy that happened at his party. But he wants to take responsibility for it. But his lawyer says, look, you don't need to. If you sign that piece of paper, you're going to go to prison. If you don't sign it, I can fight this case and I'll win. But he still signs it, and that was a bit of a head scratcher for me. I didn't understand that, because essentially it wasn't his fault. And another big plot hole for me right at the end was he gets this huge fight at the end of this film, but he'd been in prison for 4 years, and when he came out of prison, he'd not had one professional fight. Nobody'd heard of him for years, and yet he gets this huge shot at the end of the film, and that wouldn't make sense. You'd have to do at least 2 or 3 fights to, for any boxing commission surely to consider you to fight for a huge title. But so there are a couple of plot holes in this movie that don't make a lot of sense, but from my perspective, I'll give this film a 6.5 out of 10. I thought it was a good attempt at a boxing drama, but there are some things that can't be ignored in regards to plot holes and things that don't necessarily work in regards to acting performances. But I thought it was a good attempt, so I hope you enjoyed this review, and thank you very much for watching.